Let's be real, who doesn't love the idea of long-range magic, just carpet bombing everything into oblivion from a safe distance? But Setsuna Cromwell saw that meta and said nah. He deliberately chose the forgotten dusty path of melee magic. Every single one of his classmates thought the dude was cooked, that the Academy's top prodigy was literally speedrunning the end of his own career. What they didn't know was that Setsuna was playing on a different timeline, because in 10 years the apocalyptic evil god Vidrak was going to crash the server, and against a world-ending boss like Vidrak, long-range magic was completely useless. Setsuna knew this because he'd already lived it. He was once the most cracked mage on the entire continent. When Vidrak first appeared, Setsuna led the most elite squad of mages straight into the fray. Even after they unleashed a massive 5-person fusion spell, a Kamehameha of pure arcane power, it couldn't even scratch the shield Vidrak had up. And then, with a lazy flick of his wrist, Vidrak turned the whole continent into a graveyard. Watching his friends get stomped into paste under Vidrak's boot, something in Setsuna snapped. He stopped thinking and just threw a desperate magic-infused punch, trying to send that monster flying. And in that moment, he made a shocking discovery. A simple, magic-powered punch actually connected. It did real damage. Setsuna Cromwell's long-range skills were legendary, the best on the continent. But his melee magic, he was a level 1 scrub who'd barely learned the tutorial. So predictably, the evil god Vidrak completely dismantled him. But as he was fading, the blue necklace around his neck exploded in a blinding light. It was the time necklace, a gift the headmaster had given him way back in his academy days. The legend said that in the absolute final moment between life and death, it could rewind the clock, sending its owner hurtling back into their past. With that single thought, he made a silent promise. If he got a second chance, he was going all in on melee magic. When he finally came to a heavy familiar pat landed on his back, he spun around and saw a face he knew all too well, except Leo was supposed to have been dead for years. Staring at the massive academy building in front of him, the reality hit him like a truck. He had actually been reborn, thrown a full 10 years into the past, right back into his school days. This time he would master melee magic. This time he wouldn't let Vidrak burn his world to the ground. Just as he was getting lost in his future plans, Leo's voice cut through the noise, telling him it was his turn to pick a magic specialization. Setsuna quickly walked up to the podium. He could hear the faint whispers from the crowd, the girls buzzing about the school's #1 talent. Everyone was on the edge of their seat, waiting to see what path the prodigy would choose. As the instructor spread his hands and opened the ancient spellbook, a tidal wave of raw mana flooded Setsuna's vision. In an instant, countless glowing paths of magic materialized before him, each one a future waiting to be claimed. The instructor warned him to choose carefully because a mage's focus is finite. You could only walk one path to its ultimate end. Everyone in that room bet their life savings he would pick long-range magic. After all, in his previous life, that's exactly what he did, and it made him the most powerful long-range mage in history. The perks were obvious. You get insane attack range, you can kite your enemies forever, keeping yourself out of danger. You have massive area of effect spells that can wipe out entire armies, and you can wear down any opponent without ever taking a hit. But none of that mattered. Long-range magic was a joke against the evil god Vidrak. And that's why, in this life, he decisively turned his back on the path of the glass cannon. He pivoted and walked straight toward the section for melee magic. The instructor's jaw hit the floor. He couldn't believe his eyes watching this genius basically commit career suicide. Even Leo was completely bewildered. He was like, "Bro, what are you doing? Weren't we supposed to pick long range together and be caster bros?" The instructor finally found his voice, warning him that melee magic is all about physical power, a dangerous path that forces you to fight up close. It was a dead-end specialization that no one had ever truly mastered. "Are you absolutely sure you want to choose this and throw away your brilliant future?" Setsuna knew better than anyone that right now this path looked completely hopeless. But melee magic was the one and only cheat code capable of dealing critical damage to the evil god Vidrak, and mastering it was the entire reason he had returned to this exact moment 10 years in the past. "Evil god Vidrak, this time I'm going to punch your grand design to smithereens." As the official mark of melee magic burned itself onto the back of his hand, the other students were so stunned they looked like they'd seen a ghost. The Academy's golden boy had in their minds just flushed his future down the toilet. At that exact moment, the sharp snap of a closing book echoed from behind him. The instructor was trembling with pure fury. He had planned to make Setsuna Cromwell his personal disciple the second he chose long-range magic. Because his true identity wasn't just some random teacher. He was Syracuse Clado, the dean of the long-range magic department. He was dead certain he could have shaped Setsuna into the strongest mage alive, a legendary achievement that would have cemented his own legacy forever. Setsuna gave the fuming dean the coldest shoulder imaginable. Right now, the only thing that mattered was leveling up his melee skills and fast. He only had 10 short years before Vidrak descended on the world, and yet, after doing a full sweep of the academy, he couldn't find a single classroom for his major, completely dedicated to melee magic. And in that moment, Setsuna Cromwell felt the whispers creeping up behind him from his classmates. They were all saying the same thing, that by choosing melee magic, his future was basically cooked. He just tuned out the noise and made his way toward another academic building, continuing his search. Suddenly, a girl's piercing scream sliced through the air. His eyes locked onto a livid red-haired girl. A crew of upperclassmen was shaking her down, and one of them had just ripped a brooch right off her uniform. This wasn't just any accessory. It was a high-tier artifact capable of storing mana. The blonde ringleader had zero chill. The long-range magic insignia on the back of his hand pulsed with light as he instantly conjured a fireball. A split second later, that fireball rocketed forward, hurtling straight for the girl. She pumped mana into her legs and managed to barely sidestep the blast. This was textbook melee magic 101, body strengthening, the art of amping up a specific body part by flooding it with raw power. She then rerouted that energy to her hand, materializing a dagger forged from pure mana. The blonde just smirked, oozing arrogance, as he kept his distance, casually whipping up more fireballs. In theory, long-range magic held an untouchable advantage over close-quarters combat. Before long, the girl was being forced back, completely overwhelmed. She couldn't even get close enough to graze his robes. Sensing his chance, the blonde unleashed 3 more fireballs in a rapid-fire volley. But at that critical second, Setsuna Cromwell exploded into the scene, sweeping the girl into his arms and narrowly dodging the incoming attack. There was no question this girl was from the melee magic department. Saving her was the perfect trade-off, forgetting directions to their classroom. The blonde and his goons immediately clocked who Setsuna Cromwell was. He was a certified prodigy at the academy. Every magic department had been desperate to recruit him, but the second they spotted the melee magic insignia on his hand, the blonde's expression turned ugly. A nasty sneer spread across his face. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned another fireball. In his mind, long range was king, and melee magic was trash. Realizing this, Setsuna Cromwell knew he had to set the record straight. True power isn't about the type of magic you choose, it's about the skill of the person who wields it. The blonde launched his assault, a relentless storm of fireballs surging from both hands. Setsuna Cromwell mirrored what the girl did, flooding his own legs with mana. The fireballs only blasted the dirt behind him. They couldn't even touch the guy. Seeing this, the blonde was absolutely shook. No normal human should be able to move like that. No matter how close Setsuna Cromwell got, the blonde's attacks couldn't land a single hit. Getting desperate now, the blonde slammed the 2 fireballs in his hands together, forging a single, massively powerful orb of destruction. At the exact same instant, Setsuna Cromwell focused his own magic, manifesting a mana dagger in his hand. With one clean strike, he sliced the supercharged fireball clean in half. The blonde never in his wildest dreams thought a day would come when someone could literally cut his magic apart. Even the girl stared, her mind blown. Setsuna then broke down the reality of the situation. When 2 spells collide, the deciding factor is the user's raw control over mana. And in that department, Setsuna Cromwell's manipulation skills were on a whole different level, which is why he won. But the blonde wasn't about to accept that explanation. He started charging up an even bigger fireball to prove his point, but Setsuna had absolutely no intention of letting him. He bolted forward, fist pulled back and ready to fly. In that instant, the full force of melee magic was concentrated into Setsuna Cromwell's right fist. He buried that punch deep into the blonde's stomach. A heartbeat later, the guy crumpled to the ground, out cold. A fist-sized impression was literally branded onto his gut. This was the brutal efficiency of melee magic. Once you get in close, it's game over, total domination. The blonde's lackeys were completely terrified. Since when could a melee fighter body a long-range mage like that? They watched as Setsuna Cromwell walked toward them, his right hand slowly unclenching. The last goon standing immediately folded, throwing the girl's brooch at him, and whining that he was just following the blonde's orders. Setsuna couldn't care less, and just waved him away, telling him to get lost. After they scrambled off, Setsuna Cromwell handed the brooch back to the girl, seeing how hard she fought for it earlier. It was obviously something precious to her. She took it and carefully secured it in her pocket. To Setsuna's surprise, the girl whose name was Layla actually knew who he was. Of course, she was just as floored that he'd chosen to specialize in melee magic. When she found out Setsuna was trying to find the melee department's classroom, Layla suddenly realized the bell had already gone off. She immediately took the lead, guiding Setsuna toward their department building. It was becoming pretty clear why melee magic got no respect. Their classroom was located in the most remote, rundown corner of the entire campus. The whole way there, Layla wouldn't stop bugging Setsuna to teach her his mana control, freaking out over how he managed to slice a fireball in 2, and saying it was the most insanely cool thing she'd ever seen. What went down with the blonde was just more proof that melee magic was the real deal. Under the right circumstances, this power could explode into a whole universe of combat styles. Back in his first life, Setsuna Cromwell remembered a mind-blowing secret he'd picked up over coffee with the headmaster. The old man had actually mastered 2 completely separate magical disciplines at the same time. That single bombshell totally nuked everything Setsuna thought he knew about magic. He'd been taught you could only ever walk one path, but the insane magic seal, glowing on the headmaster's left hand, was like nothing from the textbooks. Back then, the headmaster had just left him hanging, promising to spill the tea when the time was right. But then the evil god Vidra crashed the party, the headmaster was taken out, and the secret of that freaky magic mark was buried with him. A few moments later, Layla was guiding Setsuna Cromwell toward the melee magic department's building, where some random figure was just chilling by the entrance. Setsuna didn't even clock him. His brain was still overclocking, trying to figure out how to get back on the headmaster's good side in this new timeline. As they got closer, a massive bald instructor suddenly blocked their path, looming over them like a mountain. The teacher was absolutely fuming that Setsuna was late, and straight up barked, "Don't even bother showing your face in my class again." Setsuna Cromwell, I don't care how much of a hotshot you were before. The second you walked into my department, you became absolute garbage. Hearing that, Setsuna smacked the guy's hand away and clapped back, asking if he really had zero pride in the very magic he was supposed to be teaching. That question hit a major nerve. The instructor yanked Setsuna up by the collar, his voice a low growl. "You're a student. You better start acting like one." But Setsuna was completely unfazed, just coolly laying out facts, arguing that melee magic had a universe of untapped potential, just waiting to be unlocked. The bald teacher, however, wasn't trying to hear any of it. He just dragged Setsuna straight to the training grounds, used by the melee magic crew. Over there, a kid with glasses was juicing up both his hands with melee energy and letting out a primal scream. A shockwave of pure power slammed into a giant boulder, only to get completely rejected. Not a single scratch on the rock. This was apparently how they ranked students. See, there's a crystal buried inside that black steel boulder, and the goal is to crack the stone open, so you can pull the crystal out. But a full hour had gone by, and despite trying every trick in the book, not a single student had managed to even chip the stone, let alone retrieve the crystal. After a beat, the bald teacher grabbed a fresh boulder for Setsuna and gave him just 10 minutes to prove all his big talk about melee magic's potential. Layla saw it instantly. The teacher was totally setting him up. Forget the fact that 10 minutes was a borderline impossible ask. This rock was noticeably bigger than the ones the other students were struggling with. The instructor just ignored her, clicking his stopwatch and reminding Setsuna with an ice-cold tone that he was now down to 9 minutes. Setsuna just patted Layla's shoulder, giving her a look that said, "I got this." He then reached out his senses, probing the flow of mana inside the stone. All the while, the bald teacher kept sniping him with sarcastic comments from the sidelines, even declaring that if Setsuna would just apologize and admit he was wrong, he'd get some extra time. After a short beat, Setsuna shot that offer down, stating flatly that he only needed 10 seconds to turn the thing to dust. Hearing this, the bald instructor just scoffed, looking at Setsuna like he'd grown a second head, and asked, "Do you have any clue what 10 seconds even is?" Even Layla was staring at Setsuna, completely shook. I mean, this boulder was way denser than the others. Even the instructor himself wouldn't dare claim he could smash it in 10 seconds. It would take him 30 minutes easy. After that, the instructor made it crystal clear there would be no do-overs for Setsuna. He didn't even blink, just waiting to watch Setsuna fail to smash the rock in 10 seconds. With that settled, Setsuna figured it was time to show this guy what it really meant to be on a whole other level. The melee magic seal on his hand erupted in a blinding flash of light, materializing into a dagger made of pure mana. Setsuna knew he couldn't just stop there. To even get a nod from the headmaster, he had to become the undisputed GOAT. He swung his blade, but the expected explosion of rock and dust never happened. Seeing this, a smug, triumphant grin spread across the instructor's face, and he exploded into laughter, already cooking up all sorts of punishments. But for Setsuna Cromwell, that smirk was wiped clean off his face a split second later. The colossal boulder just imploded, erupting into a blinding storm of dust and what felt like over 1,000 jagged shards. A moment later, Setsuna Cromwell strolled up to the instructor, presenting the crystal he'd retrieved. The time, a perfect 10 seconds, not a millisecond more, not one less. The bald instructor was completely rattled. This wasn't student-level power, this was something else entirely. Layla could only gape at Setsuna Cromwell, her mind reeling, never truly believing he could actually pull off the 10-second stunt. All around them, the sounds of training died down, as every single student swiveled their heads to stare. In their eyes, Setsuna Cromwell's power had already eclipsed that of their so-called instructor. Still, the bald instructor's ego wouldn't let him accept it. Convinced it was impossible to shatter the stone that fast, let alone in 10 seconds, he insisted Setsuna Cromwell had to have pulled a fast one. Hearing the accusation, Setsuna just scoffed at the idea of needing 10 whole minutes for a single rock. From his perspective, the instructor needed to go back to square one and relearn mana control like a total newbie. The bald instructor instantly saw red and was about to unleash his fury, but a commanding voice from behind stopped him cold. A massive, muscular hand clamped down firmly on the bald instructor's head. As the voice boomed, picking on the students again, "Are we?" The man standing there was Leoniel. the head honcho of the melee magic department. Leoniel immediately pieced it together. Setsuna could literally read the flow of mana, coursing through the stone. He found its absolute weakest point and hit it with surgical precision, which is how he managed to vaporize it, in 10 seconds flat. Leoniel glared at the bald instructor. And you have the nerve to call yourself a teacher when you couldn't even spot that. After that takedown, Leoniel called a halt to the training, announcing that the bald instructor was about to become a live demonstration for magical defense. Leoniel then began channeling a terrifying amount of magic into his right fist. A single explosive punch sent the bald instructor rocketing backwards several meters. Only the man who took the hit could ever comprehend the sheer crushing force behind that one blow. Leoniel then casually walked over to Setsuna Cromwell, welcoming him to the melee magic department. "Kid, you've got guts. I like that. The move you just pulled reminded me of myself back in the day." In response, Setsuna Cromwell completely agreed with Leoniel's assessment and proclaimed he would leverage the power of close-quarters combat to become the #1 student of the entire year. Vibing with his fierce determination, Professor Leoniel told him that his door was always open if he was serious about learning melee magic. But what Setsuna had no idea about was that a new plan was already clicking into place in Leoniel's mind. He was going to use a new experimental training regimen, with Setsuna as the guinea pig. Not long after, Leoniel rounded up all the students on the training ground. "One more time. I'm sure you've all figured out what's coming. That's right, it's time to pick our champion for the exchange tournament." This was the big one, a huge showdown where 8 magic departments would throw down for glory, in a brutal gauntlet-style battle, each sending their single best fighter until only one victor remained. In his past life, Setsuna had absolutely dominated this tournament as the champion, for the long-range magic department even earning a personal nod from the headmaster. This time, though, he was dead set on snagging the champion spot for the melee magic crew. At that exact moment, an image of the shattered boulder fragments suddenly flooded his vision. An instant later, Leoniel's voice snapped his focus. Back to the present. Apparently, someone else had already demolished a boulder and grabbed the crystal. But unlike Setsuna, who had used a mana dagger, this guy had obliterated the rock with nothing but his bare fists. It clicked that the debris field littering the ground was all this guy's handiwork. Scanning the area, Setsuna Cromwell's eyes locked onto a lone figure standing off in a distant corner. Only then did he process that the rock chips had flown all the way from that spot. The man's name was Drago Aklido. With a rugged, chiseled face and a ridiculously jacked physique, he radiated pure intimidation just by existing among the others. He loomed a full head and shoulders over everyone, and the sheer size difference created an almost suffocating aura of pressure. Drago was clearly thrown by Setsuna Cromwell's choice to join the melee magic department. "You're the Academy's golden boy. You could have had your pick of the litter like long-range magic. Why come to melee?" Setsuna gave him a straight answer. "Because this is more of a challenge for me, and I like to push my own boundaries." Drago replied, his voice calm and steady. "Melee magic is all about raw physical power. My family has perfected it for generations. It took me 17 years of non-stop brutal training to forge this body. And you, with that scrawny frame of yours, you can't touch me no matter what you try. If you don't want to get absolutely clowned on, I suggest you walk away now and drop out of the race for the representative slot. That's Drago for you, the undisputed king of the melee magic department, where even a lazy jab from him packed enough force to shatter bone." In his past life, Drago had been the one to represent the melee department in the exchange tournament, but in this life, Setsuna Cromwell had just crashed his party by joining the same division. And no matter how overpowered Drago was, he was going to have to take a back seat. Right then, Leoniel stepped between them, signaling for both guys to cool it. If they were itching for a fight, they could settle it officially at the representative selection match, just 1 week later. With that, Drago spun on his heel and stalked away, but not before promising a definitive beatdown. To be fair though, Drago had every right to be that arrogant. Even the other students were betting he had a way higher chance of winning than Setsuna Cromwell ever would. The only person in his corner was Layla. That girl just had this unshakable faith in him. However, Setsuna immediately shot her down. As things stood right now, he had zero chance of winning against Drago. Hearing this, Layla stared at him in total disbelief, but the truth was the truth. Drago's physical specs were on a level Setsuna could never hope to reach through any normal kind of training. Fortunately, he had an ace up his sleeve, a secret weapon that gave him a glimmer of hope to surpass Drago later on. Layla's interest was immediately sparked, and she followed right behind him. Soon after, Setsuna led Layla to a colossal tree that scraped the very heavens. This was a secret high-level training zone that only he knew about. Training here, for a single day, was like grinding for 3 days anywhere else. This was because it was an ancient sacred tree that had stood for over 1,000 years. Feeling a warm green healing light wash over his body, Setsuna felt a wave of relief that in this timeline, it had once again accepted him. As long as he held the sacred tree's blessing, he could instantly recover any mana he burned through. This meant as long as he stayed in this spot, he would never have to worry about running on empty. He could, therefore, push his training far beyond any normal human limits. Even so, Layla was still incredibly worried about him. Drago, after all, was a natural-born melee mage, but when she thought back to how Setsuna helped her get her brooch back, she made up her mind to do some recon and gather some high-value intel on Drago for him. Not long after, Layla arrived at the Melee Magic Department's training facility. Drago's explosive bench press was so fast it was leaving afterimages. It was painfully obvious the weights here were no longer a challenge for him. Realizing this, he called out to Professor Leoniel, "Hey, are there any black steel boulders left in the training grounds?" After getting a confirmation, he waved his hand dismissively and strode out of the gym. Just moments later, Drago's roars echoed across the training grounds. He was pumping out push-ups with 5 massive black steel boulders strapped to his back. The sight sent an icy chill down Layla's spine. With a body that powerful, anyone who took a direct hit from him would be either permanently crippled or sent straight to the morgue. Without a second thought, she spun around and sprinted toward the sacred tree. She had to warn Setsuna immediately. At that very moment, Setsuna was sitting beneath the sacred tree, calmly flipping through a melee magic textbook. Seeing him so relaxed, Layla urgently signaled that this was absolutely not the time to be chilling and reading. She told him she had just seen Drago doing push-ups, with 5 freaking black steel boulders on his back. Setsuna, however, stayed as calm as ever, confidently channeling mana straight into his eyes. The pages of the magic book in his hands began to fly by at a ridiculous speed. In a flash, the entire book's contents were downloaded and seared into his memory. The core principle of physical enhancement was using mana to reinforce and precisely pilot the nervous system, just like how you'd instinctively channel mana into your arms or legs. As Setsuna flooded his head and eyes with mana, his capacity for memorization hit a level that was completely off the charts. With the theory fully absorbed, his practical application of the skills became insanely efficient. Just then, a leaf drifting on the wind floated into his field of view. Setsuna immediately shot mana into his legs and kicked. The leaf instantly disintegrated into dust. He then focused mana into his hand, forming a dagger of pure energy, and slashed. The leaf was cleaved cleanly in two. Layla was left absolutely stunned. She had never seen anyone learn at such a terrifying speed, but Setsuna knew all too well that this still wasn't going to be enough. Drago was a natural prodigy who had been training intensely since he was a kid. The very next second, his legs buckled and he collapsed onto the dirt. Worse, the muscles in his arm had been torn to shreds. This was the brutal price for pushing his body past its breaking point. As Setsuna focused his mana to enhance his healing factor, his arm began to regenerate at a speed you could actually see with your own eyes. Seeing this, Layla felt a sharp pang of dread and told him he didn't need to torture himself like this. Surely there were other ways. Setsuna immediately shut that down. Only by pushing past his absolute limits could he even hope to close the massive gap between himself and Drago. Her heart sank when she realized Setsuna was planning to repeat this horrifying cycle of cellular collapse and rebuild itself 1,000 times in just 1 week. Layla couldn't even fathom how someone could survive that kind of hell. But Setsuna just waved it off like it was nothing. For him, the grind was second nature. It had been his entire life. Way back, he was completely magicless, but that didn't stop him from grinding out the most mind-numbing mana drills every single day. Failure after failure, yet he never once backed down. Finally, after that non-stop day in day out grind, he actually did it. He moved a rock, using nothing but his mana. If it meant getting stronger, being torn apart and rebuilt 1,000 times, was just the price of admission. In the following days, Layla got her own blessing from the sacred tree and started training with Setsuna, pushing her body past its breaking point. And it wasn't long before she also unlocked the power to obliterate a black steel boulder with one punch. And that's when it clicked for Layla. Setsuna wasn't some prodigy just because of raw talent. He was built on sheer inhuman dedication. Meanwhile, Setsuna started cranking out push-ups, with 5 massive black steel boulders stacked on his back, closing the power gap with Drago bit by bit. Seeing this, an old saying popped into Layla's head. There's nothing scarier than a genius who outworks everyone. Before they knew it, the week was over, and it was time for the selection match. The second Drago laid eyes on Setsuna, his jaw practically hit the floor. He seriously never thought Setsuna would have the nerve to show his face. Hearing this, Setsuna just locked eyes with him, his own resolve like steel. He was here for one thing and one thing only, that representative spot. Leoniel raises his hand, and the fight is on. The moment the signal is given, Setsuna explodes off the line, rushing Drago with everything he's got. But Drago, he's a statue, just crosses his arms in front of his chest, an unbreakable fortress of a man. Setsuna channels mana into his legs and throws a devastating roundhouse. This brutal non-stop barrage immediately puts Drago on the back foot, giving him zero room to even think about a counterattack. The pressure works. Drago, who'd been turtling up the whole time, gets blasted back several meters. But even then, his guard is still rock solid. You couldn't see a single trace of worry in those determined eyes. The instant Setsuna leaves himself open for just a fraction of a second, Drago seizes the opportunity and lunges forward. His enormous fist carves through the air, kicking up a storm of dust. Setsuna drops low, dodging the fight-ending blow by a literal hair. If that thing had connected, it would have been game over right then and there. Drago instantly snaps his right fist back and fires off a lightning-fast left straight, aimed right for Setsuna's face. But Setsuna weaves right past it. A right hook immediately comes screaming in. Setsuna throws up a two-armed block, eating the full force of the brutal impact. After that exchange, Drago is still looking smug. From his perspective, Setsuna's raw power was still a joke. And honestly, most of the crowd was thinking the exact same thing. That Drago was completely dominating, while Setsuna was just desperately defending. However, Leoniel, the ref for this whole thing, saw what was really going on. On the surface, it looked like Drago was unleashing hell, but with every single attack, Setsuna was using pinpoint mana control to just nullify the damage. Drago's onslaught just gets more and more ferocious. He's dead set on snagging that representative spot no matter what it takes. See, he was born into a family of close combat mages, and both he and his dad had been clowned on for years by mages from other schools of magic. And because of that, Drago swore he would rewrite his destiny with his own two hands. That burning rage, Setsuna knew it, all too well. It was the same look he got from everyone when he decided to become a melee mage, and that was the exact reason why Setsuna had to reach the top to get so powerful that he'd shut up every single hater who ever dissed their fighting style. So he tells Drago, let's shoot for something even bigger. For a split second, Drago just freezes. That kind of goal was on a level he'd never even let himself dream of. But his mission right now was simple: crush Setsuna and lock down that representative spot. And in that one moment of hesitation, the entire tide of the battle shifts to Setsuna. Even Leoniel can feel it. The climax is coming. Setsuna takes a step back, creating some space. Drago pours every last ounce of his power into his right fist, his muscles coiling to their absolute peak. The energy he's building up starts to crack the very ground beneath his feet, making the air itself vibrate. Setsuna's backed into a corner right at the edge of the arena. All his escape routes are cut off. Veins are popping on Drago's arm as he winds up the one punch to end it all. But the haymaker he was sure would finish it smashes right through a monoclone. Setsuna had already blinked behind him, leaving a decoy made of pure mana. In his place, Drago is stuck in his follow-through, completely wide open and unable to move. Setsuna materializes a mana dagger and lands a clean, perfect slice across Drago's side. Barring a miracle, this fight is over. After Setsuna delivers that final hit, Drago just completely gives out and collapses, totally unable to continue. And the real devastating impact of that last strike was something only Drago would ever truly know. At the last possible second, Setsuna dialed back the mana dagger, shifting it to a non-lethal setting, a jaw-dropping display of masterclass mana control. A moment later, all Drago could see was Setsuna's hand. Finally accepting his loss, Drago asked, "What the hell pushes you to go this hard?" After a beat, Setsuna shot back, "To become stronger than anyone, and to make damn sure no one ever takes anything from me again." Drago just stared, his mind blown, finally getting that he'd been completely trapped by his own perceived limits. Losing to a guy like you, he admitted, "I've got no regrets. You really are the #1 in the melee magic department, no cap." As Leoniel raised Setsuna's arm high, it was official. Setsuna was now repping the melee magic department in the exchange tournament. A few days later, the champions from all 8 departments convened for the face-to-face tournament. But before they split up, Leonel hit Setsuna with a serious warning to watch his back, almost as if he had a gut feeling that the road ahead was going to be a total minefield. And wouldn't you know it, the second Setsuna walked into the venue, he was slammed with a wave of raw hostility from the other reps. A blonde dude in glasses looked legit, shocked to see him, as if he never expected the melee magic department to actually bother sending someone. The magic emblem on the guy's arm practically screamed that he was from the enchantment department. Unfortunately for everyone, his mouth was venomous. He immediately started gloating, running his mouth about the melee magic department's legendary reputation for being rock bottom. The dude even had the nerve to step on Setsuna's foot with a smirk, adding, "Yo kid, I really hope you make it past the first round. At least then, you'll finally snap your department's century-long losing streak. Melee magic needs to know its place. Stay in the gutter and go pump some iron." Before he could finish his trash talk, Setsuna stomped right back on the guy's foot. "I dig your unique way of saying hello. Just make sure you keep that same energy when you're staring me down in the arena." That comeback instantly set the four-eyed punk off. He absolutely blew a gasket, threatening to teach Setsuna a lesson right then and there. In that exact moment, a commanding voice boomed from behind them, shutting him down. "It's great that you youngsters have some fire, but save it for the ring." With the headmaster's arrival, the exchange tournament officially kicked off. A pink-haired girl practically vibrated with excitement at the sight of him, and boldly swore she would deliver an absolutely flawless run in the tournament. In Setsuna's previous life, that same prodigy from the summoning department had made massive waves only for Setsuna to crush her in the final match. The headmaster then began to lay out the rules. He explained the guidelines for the exchange tournament. It was going to be a straight one-on-one bracket, and just as Setsuna had prayed for, his very first opponent was none other than the smack-talking rep from the enchantment department. The headmaster encouraged everyone to see the tournament as a serious form of practical training. He declared he was amped to see everyone's true fighting spirit in 10 days. And with that, the headmaster clasped his hands behind his back and quietly dipped. Seeing his opening, Setsuna bolted after him. In this new life, this was his only real shot to speak with the man. The headmaster turned around, a puzzled look on his face, obviously confused why the melee magic department's kid was chasing him down. Headmaster Setsuna asked, "If I win this whole tournament, would you be willing to teach me magic?" He immediately clarified, "That secret magic you wield with your left hand." The headmaster's entire expression shifted instantly. A crushing, invisible pressure slammed down on the area. It was painfully obvious the headmaster was now intensely wary of Setsuna. But Setsuna didn't flinch. He wasn't obsessed with the spell for its own sake, but because it was one of the very few weapons that had a prayer against the evil god Vidra. The truth about his reincarnation, though, was a secret he could never ever reveal. In the end, Setsuna's unwavering, dead-serious gaze finally broke the headmaster's resolve. "If you manage to claim the championship title, I will teach you the magic of my left hand." Before dipping for good, the headmaster added one last warning: that path to mastery is anything but easy. A little while later, Setsuna was posted up on a campus bench alone, realizing he needed a bulletproof game plan for the next 10 days. Out of nowhere, a massive puppet stomped into his line of sight. The guy in glasses stepped out of the shadows. The giant construct was clearly his creation. It all made perfect sense now why he was the enchantment department's rep. He had actually brought the puppet to life, purely through mana manipulation. As the dude raised his right hand, it was like invisible puppet strings were controlling the giant's every move. In the blink of an eye, 5 of these puppet giants had materialized on the field. Just then, a notification pinged on his communicator, warning that any unsanctioned duels would lead to immediate disqualification. With a beat, the dude in the glasses raised his hand and cut the power. In a flash, the colossal puppets just blinked out of existence. He shot a dismissive wave over his shoulder, already walking away, but not before dropping a final threat. He'd settle things for good at the exchange tournament. After that throwdown, Setsuna had to give him props. When it came to pure raw talent, the guy was an absolute monster. The second they got back to the melee magic department, instructor Leoniel tossed Setsuna into an insane special training regimen, starting by brutally picking apart his every weakness. The most glaring flaw was obvious: his raw physical stats were garbage. Hearing this, a grin spread across Leoniel's face. The entire next phase of training was designed to fix that one massive vulnerability. Drago jacked up his mana, cranking agility and multi-directional attacks, perfectly mimicking the assault patterns of a swarm of puppet giants attacking from every conceivable angle. This was designed to replicate the crushing pressure he'd face against the enchantment department's ace. Know your enemy, own the battlefield. The moment the explanation was over, Drago flooded his body with mana and exploded into action. A left hook rocketed straight for Setsuna's face. Setsuna dodged it by a hair, shifting just out of reach. Drago instantly snapped the punch back and faked a right hook, making Setsuna instinctively guard his left flank. And right then, Setsuna clocked the ghost of a smirk playing on Drago's lips. The right hook was a bait. The real kill shot was a delayed left hook coming right behind it. With no other option, Setsuna threw up a cross-arm block. His reaction time was still a split second too slow. Leoniel nodded, impressed. Drago's combo was executed with flawless timing. As the hours bled together, Setsuna slowly started syncing up with Drago's blitzing speed and attack flows. Finally, he spotted the one tiny opening he needed and launched his counter. By the time the session was over, Setsuna knew that if this kept up, he'd be in peak condition when the tournament kicked off. 10 days later, the exchange tournament between the 8 magic departments officially went live. The stands were absolutely jammed, and the very first fight on the docket was Setsuna versus the four-eyed prodigy from the enchantment department. You know, wherever there's a fight, there's gonna be betting. The problem, almost no one was putting their money on Setsuna, which meant one thing: a win here was about to cause a massive upset. Up in the stands, the blonde homie clutched his now empty wallet and screamed Setsuna's name like his life depended on it. He'd bet it all, convinced Setsuna was the ultimate dark horse. At that exact moment, the head instructor and the top student from the long-range magic department showed up to scout the competition. After all, one of these guys could be their next opponent. At the announcer's signal, the battle began: the fated duel between Setsuna and the glasses-wearing enchanter. The stage was a massive desert. When he heard the arena choice, the bespectacled man couldn't hide his satisfaction. This terrain was absolutely perfect for his ace-in-the-hole black steel. A chunk of the metal slowly sank into the sand, fusing with the grains and rapidly erupting into a towering black steel colossus. And he had dozens more of these black steel stones. Before anyone could even blink, an entire army of steel giants materialized on the field. He even threw out a friendly reminder in this desert. His black steel colossi could regenerate infinitely. Hearing that the enchantment department students were already laughing him out of the arena, acting like the win was already in the bag, the bespectacled man gestured with pure arrogance, telling Setsuna he could just surrender now and save the melee magic department from total humiliation. But Setsuna just looked bored. "I was expecting way more from you," he said. "Is this really all your talent amounts to?" The words hit the dude like a truck, leaving him staring in utter disbelief. With a furious wave, he sent his entire army of black steel giants charging forward. In his mind, Setsuna was already a dead man. Choking on his own arrogant laughter, he bellowed, "No one survives a pincer attack from my black steel colossi. The melee magic department will forever be stuck at the bottom where it belongs." And then mid-charge, every single one of the advancing giants froze dead in their tracks. The melee magic crest on Setsuna's hand blazed to life as his mana solidified into a glowing dagger. With a single fluid slash, the closest black steel colossus dissolved into a cloud of dust. Long before this match ever started, Setsuna had already completely mapped out the flow of mana inside the black steel. To him, these so-called titans were just slow-moving practice dummies. The bespectacled man's jaw dropped, watching his prized army get turned into a pile of rubble. He refused to accept that his ultimate creations could be taken down so damn easily. In a desperate panic, he started weaving mana with both hands, frantically summoning more and more colossi, trying to Zerg rush Setsuna with pure numbers. But for Setsuna, these puppets capable of only the most basic commands were nothing but targets in a shooting gallery. There was zero suspense, one strike, one kill. Each and every construct was systematically erased by Setsuna's mana dagger, not a single one lasting more than 2 seconds. Sure, you could technically call the colossi a form of close-quarters magic, but in that arena, Setsuna's hand-to-hand combat was the undisputed king. As the final golem crumbled under his mana dagger, the four-eyed mage completely lost his cool, scrambling to summon another wave of constructs. But it was too late. Setsuna, a blur of motion, had already erased the distance between them. "You never had a shot from the start," Setsuna said, his voice chillingly calm, "because the one you were facing was me." A split second later, a fist crackling with raw mana smashed into the mage's face. The overwhelming force launched him backward, sending him crashing into the arena floor in an explosion of grit. The thick cloud of debris completely blinded the spectators, leaving them desperate to see the outcome. When the dust finally settled, a lone figure remained standing. To everyone's utter shock, the last one on their feet was Setsuna. Layla, the melee magic department's rep, screamed in pure joy. He actually did it. The surrounding students just stared, their minds completely blown. The melee magic department hadn't clinched a victory in one of these exchange matches for nearly 100 years. Soon, students from the enchantment department started coping hard. He overextended himself. Summoning too many constructs wrecked his control. Another one chimed in, "Totally. The colossi just fell apart on their own. Melee magic got lucky, that's all." But the instructors observing from the long-range magic section saw the real story. Those things didn't just self-destruct. At the referee's signal, the second match kicked off, and the desert landscape instantly morphed into a dense, sprawling jungle. Setsuna made his way to the spectator seats and met up with Layla. He told himself he was just scouting the next fight for intel. But that was just a front. What he really wanted was a chance to talk with her. At that moment, a petite, pink-haired girl from the summoning department was absolutely running the battlefield. The massive beast she rode carved through the jungle effortlessly, treating the terrain like it was open ground. Her opponent was none other than the representative from the formation department, a discipline that focuses on deploying complex magical arrays for combat support. And even though the formation rep was being completely overwhelmed, his evasive maneuvers were incredibly fluid and unpredictable. Watching him, Setsuna immediately got an idea, planning to incorporate that style of footwork into his own fighting technique. Just then, Layla gasped beside him. "Whoa, I didn't realize the other departments had such cool moves. When will my melee magic ever look like that?" Hearing her say that, Setsuna got curious and asked why she'd chosen melee magic in the first place when other paths seemed so much more powerful. At his question, a faint smile played on Layla's lips as her mind drifted back to a time long ago. When she was just a kid, her life was saved by a melee magic user. She and her younger brother had been playing in the forest, like they always did, when a massive snarling gray bear began relentlessly hunting them. She was sure her life was about to end, under the beast's claws, but then a swift figure appeared like a mirage in her vision. With a single explosive punch, the man brought the ferocious bear down. On the back of his hand, she saw it clear as day, the symbol of the melee magic department. From that moment on, a powerful dream took root in Layla's heart, to become a melee magic user just like that man, and protect the weak. But she admitted she felt she was still a long, long way from achieving that childhood dream. She believed her own melee magic was nowhere near strong enough. Hearing her doubt herself, Setsuna immediately shot it down. "As long as you hold on to that goal, your magic will become powerful enough one day. I guarantee it." Spurred on by his words, Layla's eyes beamed, and she got so flustered with excitement she didn't even know what to do with her hands. In that instant, a familiar voice called out from behind. Setsuna spun around to see it was his best friend Leo. Setsuna was thrown for a loop seeing him because Leo hadn't become the rep for the long-range magic department. That made no sense. Leo's rank in that department had always been right behind where Setsuna used to be. Unfortunately, Leo had zero social awareness, and the first thing out of his mouth was to point directly at Layla and bluntly ask if she was Setsuna's girlfriend. Layla's face turned fire engine red. She shot up from her seat and quickly made an exit, giving Setsuna and Leo some space to talk. With her gone, Setsuna finally had a chance to ask what had been bugging him, and questioned Leo about why he wasn't the department's representative. Although Leo refused to make excuses for his loss, he gave Setsuna a stark warning: be extremely careful around the long-range rep. The guy plays dirty. Turns out the only reason Leo lost his spot was because he'd been completely sabotaged. The moment he heard that Setsuna's own defenses went up, if he was up against someone willing to cheat, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. And just as he'd expected over the next few days, a vase of flowers mysteriously kept appearing on his desk. Thankfully, Layla's sharp senses picked up on the traces of abnormal mana clinging to the vase. Getting too close to it didn't just drain your mana. Model, it clicked. Setsuna knew in an instant the long-range magic rep was the one pulling the strings. And this unbelievably was the 7th vase they had sent. Layla stared at him, her jaw practically on the floor. "I can't believe you're just taking this. How have you not gone after him yet?" The truth was, it wasn't about wanting to endure it. The guy was just a ghost, his methods surgically clean. He left zero trace, nothing that could ever be pinned on him. Just then, a frantic knocking hammered against the door. Setsuna yanked it open only to find a group of kids standing there, each one clutching a bouquet of flowers addressed to him. Of course, they were just messengers. One of the boys pointed off into the distance. "That person over there told us to bring these to you." Layla was just starting to think it might be some kind of secret admirer, when the little girl holding the main bouquet suddenly went deathly pale. The flowers slipped from her tiny hands, scattering across the floor. As she grabbed her head, a wave of vertigo crashing over her. In that same second, dark obsidian veins began to spiderweb up her neck, stark and horrifyingly visible. Setsuna's blood ran cold. He knew those markings. He'd seen them countless times on the brutal battlefields of his past life. Pure instinct took over. Setsuna's leg snapped out in a vicious kick, launching the bouquet a good 2 meters away. This wasn't just poison. It was a lethal, fast-acting airborne toxin. And just as he feared, the other 2 children started to collapse. Setsuna's gaze snapped in the direction the boy had pointed, his expression hardening to stone. He never imagined his rival would sink this low, dragging innocent children into their conflict just to get in his way. Without immediate intervention, all 3 of them were seconds from death. But finding someone who could neutralize this specific kind of toxin on a moment's notice was damn near impossible. Setsuna froze for a split second, his mind racing for a solution, when Layla gestured urgently, telling him to bring the children to her. Her confidence stemmed from the precious brooch he'd recovered for her, a memento from her mother enchanted with a powerful healing spell. As Layla gripped the brooch, and her voice rose in an ancient chant, a soft, life-giving green light enveloped the 3 small bodies. The ghastly black veins crawling up the girl's neck receded at a breathtaking pace. A wave of relief washed over Setsuna. He left the kids in Layla's care and whipped his attention back to the toxic flowers. He immediately wrapped them in a cocoon of mana, suffocating the poison spread. This had to be contained now. If that toxin got fully airborne, countless more innocent people would be caught in the fallout. But even so, the sheer potency of the venom was already eating through his mana shield. Despite his best efforts, the direct contact was already contaminating him. In just 2.5 seconds, the same dark necrotic marks started to crawl up his own neck. At that moment, he had only one play left: the miraculous, life-giving energy of the sacred tree. Clutching the deadly bouquet, Setsuna bolted towards the ancient tree, pushing himself to his absolute limit. The second he reached it, he flooded his left hand with mana and hurled the flowers far away. Simultaneously, raw power shot from his right hand, forging a condensed, razor-sharp dagger of pure mana. The blade sliced down in a clean crescent arc, completely obliterating the flowers and annihilating the toxin midair. But the poison was already ravaging his system. Setsuna fought through the searing pain, stumbling towards the sacred tree, desperate to use its power to purge the venom from his veins. Meanwhile, across the academy grounds, the selection match had already begun. Setsuna burst into the arena, just in time for the final round. "I haven't forfeited," he roared with fury. "Get down here and fight me, Actel." The long-range magic department's champion, Actel, glanced at the dark veins on Setsuna's neck and sneered. "You want to fight me looking like that?" As the referee's hand dropped to signal the start, the long-range mage unleashed a magic array from his palm, striking without hesitation. In his compromised state, all Setsuna could do was pour mana into his legs and focus entirely on dodging. Up in the stands, Professor Leoniel and Drago knew something was seriously wrong. What is he doing? This purely defensive strategy isn't his style at all. Down on the field, Setsuna was itching for a close-quarters brawl, but the poison still burning through his body needed more time to clear. For now, his only option was to dodge and stall. Seeing this, an instructor from the long-range department smirked. Looks like the plan is going off without a hitch. In the stands, Layla's seat was now conspicuously empty. Setsuna could only pray that the three children were safe. Back in the arena, his opponent, the long-range rep, was laughing maniacally, unleashing a relentless storm of spells. Weaving through the barrage left Setsuna drenched in sweat, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. To the students watching, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. They were all convinced the melee fighter had absolutely nothing left in the tank. Seizing the moment, the long-range magic rep decided to end it. He cranked up his assault, conjuring one more massive magic circle and unleashing a final, inescapable bombardment. Setsuna supercharged his arms with mana bracing for a direct hit, but his guard imploded with a sickening crack. A fireball detonated right in his face, the air itself warping from the sheer heat. When the smoke finally cleared, his arms were absolutely scorched. Actel just laughed his head off, taunting, "Haha, you really think you can fight me with those fried chicken wings?" Actel's strategy was textbook perfect: maintain relentless long-range pressure and give Setsuna zero room to advance. But the next few attacks just slammed into empty space, throwing up dust clouds. This wasn't an assault, it was a straight-up provocation. Noticing Setsuna's hesitation, Actel didn't say a word, just gave him a cold, knowing look, and gestured towards the ground. That's when Setsuna saw it. Every single foothold around him was crumbling into the lava. Actel hadn't been aiming for him at all. He'd been terraforming the entire battlefield from the get-go. Actel raised both hands, high mana flaring to life as he began the chant for his ultimate attack. From the stands, Professor Leonil and Drago went rigid with tension. If that spell connected, the fight was over. Just as Actel felt victory in his grasp, the script flipped. Layla suddenly materialized in the audience, frantically waving and screaming Setsuna's name. The brooch's healing magic had worked wonders. The three kids were officially in the clear. The news hit Setsuna like a lightning bolt, and a faint smile crossed his face. He could finally go all out. He reversed his mana flow, pulling it inward. With a surge of accelerated metabolism, the last of the poison in his system was instantly vaporized. It was a secret melee magic technique, called body stimulation, and Setsuna had been stealthily using it the entire match, commanding his very cells to dismantle the toxins. Yet Actel didn't even flinch. In his mind, under these conditions, there was no comeback possible. In the next instant, he unleashed his final move, Storm Cannon. A tidal wave of incinerating heat roared forward, completely boxing Setsuna in. Gripping his mana dagger with both hands, Setsuna funneled every last shred of his power into the blade. He spotted the single weakest point in the Storm Cannon's massive energy flow and plunged his dagger in. The inferno was sliced clean in two, the raging firestorm, ripped apart and flung right back at its caster. The sight threw Actel into a panic as he thrust his hands forward, desperately trying to summon more power. He barely threw up a shield to block the counterattack, and in that one fleeting moment, where all his concentration was on defense, Setsuna pumped his remaining mana into his legs and exploded forward, launching himself clean across the molten lava. "You didn't actually think I couldn't close this gap, did you?" One decisive slash followed. The mana dagger gleamed, as a spray of blood erupted from Actel's mouth. Seconds later, he crumpled to the ground unconscious. Setsuna had just won the semifinals. Witnessing this, Professor Leonil calmly sparked a cigar. "That's our melee department representative, all right." But just then, students in the crowd began screaming, pointing in horror at his feet. Without any warning, the stone platform beneath them both fractured and gave way, sending the two fighters plummeting downward. Setsuna instantly realized his opponent was still out cold. At this rate, Actel was about to take a lava bath. Without a moment's hesitation, Setsuna poured mana into his legs, using the falling chunks of rock like stepping stones to accelerate his own descent. He managed to snatch his opponent, just 20 centimeters from the boiling magma. As he dangled there, clinging to Actel's leg for dear life, a gigantic, winged beast from the summoning department dove out of the sky, scooping them both up and carrying them from the jaws of death. The entire stadium erupted into a thunderous roar of applause. Apparently, the summoning department's prodigy was a huge fan favorite at the academy. Judging by her flawless control over that summon, Setsuna knew the final match would be an absolute war. In his past life, he had snatched the tournament crown right from her. In this life, he was dead set on claiming that glory all over again. The spectators were in total disbelief. The melee magic department had clawed its way into the championship. This time it was clearly no fluke. Even the headmaster offered a slight nod of approval. It seems his request to learn my magic wasn't just empty bragging after all. Meanwhile, the professor from the long-range magic department was grinding his teeth, absolutely seething with rage. First, Setsuna had publicly dissed his department by choosing melee. Now, even after resorting to dirty tricks, he still couldn't get the win. Consumed by fury, the professor shot him a cold glare filled with murderous intent before turning back to the stands, scanning the crowd for Layla. After confirming that the three kids had been safely transported to the infirmary, Setsuna finally let himself relax. But in that instant, his combat instincts went into overdrive, screaming danger. A bone-chilling surge of mana, thick and heavy with the intent to kill, swept across the arena. But no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find a single thing out of place. Layla saw the sudden tension in his eyes and looked at him confused, asking, "What is it? Did you sense something?" Setsuna immediately played it cool. The less people who knew about that sinister energy signature, the better. But what he failed to notice was the sinister black mana that was quietly beginning to coalesce high above the arena. From the moment he felt that twisted, corrupt mana warping the battlefield, Setsuna had been grinding in the shadows. He was hell-bent on winning the tournament championship, but to do that he needed a serious power-up, and he only had 1 week to get it. That's why he hunted down the single most powerful fighter in the melee magic department, Leoniel. Leoniel carried a title that was the stuff of legends, one that struck fear and awe into everyone who heard it: Comet Fist. In his past life, Setsuna knew Comet Fist was a name whispered like a myth among the magical legions, a true master of combat magic. They said a single one of his punches could shatter the heavens, split the earth, and even slay divine dragons. But the legend had retired long before Setsuna ever signed up. Because of that, the two of them never got to throw down side by side against the evil god Vidra. But now, in this new life, Setsuna had the insane opportunity to be personally trained by the Comet Fist himself. The thought made Leoniel chuckle, a little embarrassed. He rubbed the back of his neck. It had been ages since anyone called him Comet Fist, but Setsuna knew the truth. Retired or not, Leoniel was without a doubt the most insanely powerful melee mage he had ever crossed paths with. To get the strength he desperately needed to shield his friends, Setsuna had to convince Leoniel to pass down that legendary technique. The moment Leoniel realized Setsuna was chasing power to protect the people he cared about, a knowing smirk finally broke across his face. "Kid, you're a mirror image of me back in the day. You crave power, but you're also terrified of it." As he spoke, Leoniel motioned for Setsuna to lock his eyes on him to absorb every single move that came next. Because this punch is going to be a work of art. Leoniel started pouring mana into his fist, compressing it, crushing it down smaller and smaller. He pushed it right to the breaking point, and then unleashed it all, in one catastrophic blast. There was a huge catch, though. The technique demanded a long charge-up time, making it totally impractical for fast-paced one-on-one duels like the qualifiers. Setsuna didn't give a damn. If there wasn't an opening, he'd just have to smash one into existence. And with that, Leoniel officially began Setsuna's training in the art of the Comet Fist. For the next week, the forest was rocked day and night by the thunderous crack of sonic booms. When Setsuna finally threw his most powerful punch, it drained every last drop of mana from his system. This was it. This was the closest he'd ever gotten to Leoniel's god-tier level. Seeing it, a cold sweat trickled down Leoniel's back. This kid. It took me 2 whole years to master what he just pulled off in a single week. As the dust settled, the raw, destructive force of that punch was undeniable. Setsuna gave his new move a fittingly epic name: Charge Shot. Not long after, the grand finals of the selection tournament kicked off. After the announcer's hype-filled opening ceremony, the 2 finalists stepped into the arena. The crowd went wild for 2 people: the summoning department's prodigy Carol and the season's ultimate underdog from the melee magic department, Setsuna. The arena for the final showdown was the goddess's ruins, a landscape littered with shattered pillars and crumbling architecture. Considering the insane destructive power of both fighters, a professor from the formation department had thrown up a heavy-duty barrier around the stage. It was meant to stop any collateral damage from hitting the audience, which meant Setsuna could finally go all out. He could finally unleash the full, unfiltered power of his charge shot. His eyes darted for a split second to the headmaster's box in the stands. He just had to hope the old man would keep his end of the bargain and teach him the secrets behind the magic in his left hand once the match was over. Carol of the summoning department simply lifted a hand, and from a tear in space behind her, an absolutely massive creature shimmered into existence. It was none other than her soul-bound summon, the legendary wolf, Fenrir. The instant Fenrir materialized, it lunged with a surprise attack. Setsuna violently twisted his body, barely dodging a blast of ice-cold breath that shot from its maw. But it got worse. The barrier around the arena was actually amplifying the freezing aura, instantly turning the entire stage into Fenrir's personal ice rink. Carol wasn't about to give him a single second to recover, signaling Fenrir to press the attack and let loose another devastating wave of frost. Setsuna knew better than to underestimate her. He flooded his body with mana, cranking all his physical stats to the max. Using slick serpentine footwork, he weaved through the chaotic storm of ice, dodging each deadly projectile by a razor's edge. In the space of a heartbeat, he closed the distance. The melee magic crest on the back of his hand blazed to life, condensing into a sharp dagger of pure mana. He sliced forward. Fenrir was too slow to dodge and took the hit dead on, but Carol just casually raised her hand and started healing it. For 2.5 agonizing seconds, Setsuna watched as Fenrir's deep gash stitched itself back together. He immediately leaped back. Putting some distance between them, he had a grim realization. Only the charge shot can finish this. But that one attack had completely flipped a switch in the once gentle Carol. She pointed a finger to the sky, syncing up with Fenrir as a tidal wave of mana exploded from them both. A bone-deep chill shot up from the ground beneath Setsuna's feet. In a flash, a wave of cold ripped across the arena, coating every inch of the floor in a treacherous sheet of ice. So the barrier really was a trap. The tables had completely turned and the situation was now overwhelmingly stacked against him. If he couldn't end this fight and end it fast, he was going to end up as a permanent ice sculpture. Setsuna let the mana dagger in his hand dissolve into nothing. While dodging the non-stop onslaught, he secretly began to gather power for the charge shot. He starts pouring raw power straight into his fist, a dense core of mana building with every second. After failing to land a single game-changing blow, Carol's composure was completely shattering. Then, with a savage flick of her wrist, she summons a second divine beast, Garuda. Drago literally shot up from his seat, his mind blown by the sight. Nobody thought it was possible. Dual summoning. Even the battle-hardened veteran Leoniel just stared totally stunned. The fact that the summoning department had spawned a prodigy of this level was just insane. Down on the field, Fenrir and Garuda descended on him from land and air, trapping Setsuna in a deadly pincer movement with zero room to escape. In the last possible second, Setsuna explodes backward in a blur of motion, narrowly blasting his way out of their kill zone. Exploiting the tiny opening right after their combo, Setsuna hammered both divine beasts with brutal elbow strikes, sending them reeling. Now the momentum had shifted. It was his time to counter. This was the ace up his sleeve. Carol's mind reeled. She never in her wildest dreams thought both of her summons could be so completely overwhelmed. But regrets were a luxury she couldn't afford. A universe of raw power was swirling around Setsuna's right fist, about to detonate. Without a sudden plot twist, the fight should have been over right then and there. And boy, did a plot twist arrive. All at once, a sinister black sigil blazed to life on Carol's neck. In the blink of an eye, an absolute hurricane of mana erupted from her body as she clawed at her throat, screaming in pure agony. A bolt of ice shot straight down Setsuna's spine. He knew this energy. It was a terrifyingly familiar presence, the same vile power that had nearly wiped him from existence in his past life, the evil god Vidrak. Fenrir and Garuda immediately started convulsing in extreme distress, thrashing violently as if fighting off some twisted, invasive parasite. That sealed it. Setsuna knew without a doubt this was Vidrak's foul mana. Carol's eyes went wide, tears carving paths down her cheeks. She was gritting her teeth, desperately trying to contain the malevolent force erupting inside her. But with a furious roar, her every defense was annihilated. As Carol's hand shot toward the sky, reality itself was forcibly ripped open. From the tier in subspace, creatures drenched in corrupted energy began to pour out. There were humanoids covered in writhing, grotesque heads, and three-headed hellhounds, each face a carbon copy of snarling fury. Then came the deceptively innocent three-eyed foxes packing lethal intent, and massive warhorses, sporting horns that were basically razor-sharp blades. The multi-headed monstrosity charged in first sword in hand as the hellhounds fanned out to encircle him, tightening the noose and cutting off all of Setsuna's escape routes. The sudden ambush completely shattered his rhythm. The powerful charged shot he had just finished cooking up simply fizzled into nothing before he could fire it. And before Setsuna could even get his bearings, Garuda, one of Carol's original summons, suddenly filled his entire vision. A single brutal claw strike launched him through the air, slamming him so hard against a stone pillar of the goddess's ruins that the ancient columns snapped clean in half. Setsuna crumpled to the floor. From that one blow alone, the very ground split apart as the entire dimension began to tremble. When the dust cleared, his right arm was completely unresponsive. Realizing this, he instantly funneled mana through his body, forcing his healing abilities into overdrive. Carol squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clamped around her own throat. It was obvious she was in a desperate battle for control of her own body, against the sinister power possessing her. Pouring mana into his legs, Setsuna launched a vicious kick that sent the closest hellhound flying with one fluid motion. Then he exploded into a dead sprint, aiming straight for Carol, knocking her unconscious. Was the only way to sever the connection to that corrupting force. At that moment, a crisp sound like a single drop of water sliced through the chaos of the fight. Tears streamed down Carol's face as she stared at him. "Leave," she choked out, "before they kill you." It was the only sentence she could manage after wrestling back a fleeting moment of clarity. Setsuna skidded to a dead stop. Those few words were all it took. His resolve hardened into steel. He was absolutely going to save her from this insidious power. He dodged past a hellhound's lunge, with a clean sidestep instantly redirecting his charge toward the smallest target on the field, the three-eyed fox. You always take out the weakest link first. That's just a fundamental law of combat. The very instant the fox was knocked out cold, the colossal frame of the blood-red warhorse crashed into his line of sight. Setsuna flooded both arms with mana, his eyes locked dead on the razor-sharp horns on the monstrous beast's head. With every ounce of his being, he seized both horns at the same time. Veins in his arms immediately ruptured, spraying blood everywhere, a clear sign. He had just pushed his body way beyond its breaking point. Even so, the gargantuan warhorse was forcibly heaved into the air. However, Setsuna had critically underestimated the warhorse's crushing weight. It came crashing down on him with brutal force, veins bulging on his forehead as his eyes widened in sheer agony. Fighting through the pain, he located the other three summoned beasts, and with a final surge of strength, yeeted the warhorse toward them, like a living projectile. But the relentless combat had torched his stamina far too quickly, leaving Setsuna on his feet, gasping for air. In that exact moment, his combat instincts began to scream, a warning. He whipped his head around only to see the three-eyed fox he'd just taken out had already regained consciousness in a flash. Its third eye morphed into a bone spike that shot out and pierced straight through Setsuna's right leg. As the spike was violently torn free, Setsuna completely lost all ability to move. Up in the stands, Leoniel couldn't stay in his seat a second longer. He realized instantly that the four new summons weren't being powered by Carol's mana anymore. And understanding the terrifying meaning behind that, he roared the Formation Mage's name, desperately trying to get him to drop the barrier and stop this lopsided beatdown. What nobody knew was that the Formation Mage had already collapsed helpless onto the ground. His eyes were lifelessly glazed over, and a magic seal on his neck was glowing with a blinding, unholy light. The one pulling the strings on that seal was none other than the mysterious cloaked figure himself. It was no wonder Leoniel's desperate shouts went completely unheard. Leoniel stared at the battlefield below, realizing with dawning horror that the situation had just spiraled completely out of control. Pure instinct launched him from his seat to hunt down the Formation Mage, but after just 2 steps, the sheer brutality on the field violently yanked his attention back to the carnage unfolding below. Setsuna was frozen, solid blood gushing from the gruesome bone spike jutting out of his right leg. Carol's summoned army barreled straight for him with her bonded beast, Fenrir, leading the terrifying charge. In less than a heartbeat, Fenrir was on him. Its jaws stretched wide, reeking of decay. Without an ounce of hesitation, it clamped down hard on Setsuna's left arm. A sickening crack of splintering bone echoed through the entire stadium as Fenrir squeezed its jaws shut, crushing Setsuna's arm. A spray of crimson painted the arena floor, shocking everyone into silence. Racked with unbelievable agony, Setsuna let out a savage roar, his eyes wide as he coughed up a lungful of blood. But he had lived this moment once before, and he refused to die here again. The melee magic sigil on the back of his hand ignited with a blinding light. His original plan was just to knock the summons out and snap Carol out of it. Clearly, he completely overestimated his ability to hold back. If this was how it was going to be, then it was time to go all out. I'm dumping every last drop of mana I have into this punch. Charged shot. This was the attack that held everything he had left. When the concussive blast from the shot finally faded, Carol's summon had vanished and she was plummeting from the sky. In that critical second, Setsuna blurred into motion, appearing right under her, catching her just before she slammed into the ground. Carol was already completely unconscious, totally out of it. Thankfully, she was still breathing. Otherwise, the weight of his charged shot would have been a curse. The students who witnessed it were absolutely speechless. Against all odds, Setsuna from the Melee Magic Department had become the undisputed champion as the host roared the final results. Fueled by pure adrenaline, Setsuna claimed the title for the 8th Division Selection Tournament in the name of the Melee Magic Department. The principal observed Setsuna with a look of deep satisfaction. What an interesting kid. You gotta know, the Melee Magic Department hasn't produced a single decent result in 100 years, and that look in his eyes. He's desperate for my left-hand magic. The students from his own department were completely floored. Even as his classmates, none of them could even begin to process the sheer power behind that final punch. Layla and Drago, however, were just ecstatic for him. Watching Setsuna crowned champion felt even better than if they had won themselves. One blonde-haired student in the audience was so hyped he could barely form words. He had put all his money on Setsuna, and the unbelievable upset just made him filthy rich. But no one noticed on the far side of the arena a mysterious man staring at the scene with pure disgust, already kicking himself for underestimating Setsuna's real strength. With that thought, a fireball ignited in his palm, as he prepared to erase every trace of his involvement, starting with the Formation Department's instructor. But in the next instant, the mysterious man's gaze sharpened. He was changing his plan on the fly. He let the fireball in his hand dissolve into nothing and instead pressed a single finger against the magic sigil, etched onto the Formation instructor's neck. Elsewhere, Leonard arrived in a flash of speed, but by the time he got there, he found only the Formation instructor collapsed on the floor. Luckily, the guy was still breathing, just knocked out cold. At that very moment, the arena's protective shield began to dissolve, right as Setsuna was wondering why the barrier had suddenly vanished. The principal descended from the sky, instantly filling Setsuna's vision. Knowing that Carol had passed out because her link to her summons was shattered, Setsuna immediately told him, "I think Carol was being manipulated." After kneeling down for a closer look, the principal delivered his verdict. "You're right. I can still sense the traces of another magic seal on her body." He then looked back to Setsuna, thoroughly impressed with his victory. That is why, for shattering a century-long losing streak for the melee magic department, Setsuna had forged a new legend. And just as he promised, the principal would honor their deal and teach him the secrets of the left-hand magic. Hearing this, a wave of pure joy washed over Setsuna. Even the agonizing pain from his wounds seemed to melt away. No other reward could have been more perfect. The principal then stood and departed, telling Setsuna to come to his office alone the next day for a private meeting. Soon after, Setsuna was whisked away to the infirmary to get his battle wounds treated. A nurse quickly and tightly wrapped his external injuries. The internal damage, though, was going to take some real time to recover from. Just then, a loud racket exploded from outside the room. The next thing he knew, the door burst open, and in stormed Leone with Layla, Drago, and the 3 kids in tow. Seeing Setsuna all bandaged up but clearly not in any mortal danger, the massive weight of anxiety finally lifted from their shoulders. What came next was a small celebration with Layla grinning from ear to ear like a kid on Christmas. Even Drago, who was normally an ice block, seemed to have thawed a bit. Setsuna's victory was like a warm tide against an iceberg, and you could tell Drago was genuinely proud of him. Model. With the immediate crisis handled, Drago and Layla gathered the kids and were the first to head out. But Lionel hung back to drop a bombshell. The formation mage powering the barrier had been mind-controlled, which is why the shield was totally unbreakable. As for Carol, she was still completely out cold. And when she finally woke up, you know the Academy was going to grill her for every last detail of what went down. Lionel then lays it out straight for Setsuna, his voice grim. This whole mess was undeniable, proof that he already had a target painted on his back. Setsuna knew he was right, and made a new vow that very night he would unmask the mastermind behind everything his way. In the dead of night, an uninvited guest slipped into Carol's hospital room. She laid there deep in a coma, totally unaware of the danger creeping closer. The shadowy figure gathered a ball of raw mana in his palm, stalking toward her bed with lethal intent. He was there to silence her for good. His mission: erase every last piece of evidence. Just as the deadly sphere of magic was about to connect, a figure exploded into the room at blinding speed. It was Setsuna, a mana dagger flashing in his hand as he sliced clean through the spell, shattering it in midair. His eyes locked onto the mysterious man, hardening with focus, but beneath it all was a wave of pure, gut-wrenching disbelief. No one could have ever guessed that the puppet master working for the evil god Vidrak was his best friend Leo. For a split second, Leo just froze. He was so confident he'd left no trail. Setsuna didn't want to accept it, but the horrifying truth was standing right in front of him. Seeing his cover was blown, Leo dropped the entire act. He casually gestured to the hall. "How about we take this somewhere else? The smell of disinfectant in here is disgusting." Leo just strolled on ahead, cool as a cucumber, while Setsuna fought to keep his rage from boiling over. The internal injuries from the finals were still screaming under his skin. If he tried to fight now, he knew Leo would absolutely demolish him. Leo let out a mocking laugh, glancing back. "That's a terrifying look on your face, Setsuna. So tell me, when did you finally figure it out?" Setsuna's voice was ice cold. He'd started getting suspicious way back during the blessing ceremony. A guy with Leo's talent would never just disappear without a trace, and with his power, there was no way in hell he'd fail to qualify for the long-range magic department. But when Setsuna saw Leo, about to silence Carol for good in that hospital room, all the pieces clicked into place. The mana signature rolling off Leo was a perfect match. It was the foul, unmistakable aura of the evil god Vidrak, a presence seared into Setsuna's memory. There was zero doubt about it. Leo was a high-ranking servant of Vidrak, and that was precisely why Setsuna had to take him down right here, right now. He couldn't let Leo continue his twisted games and terrorize the Academy. Setsuna gripped his mana dagger, determined to use it to forge a new future, to stop the demon god's return. But the second he lunged forward, the mana dagger just crumbled into dust before it even reached Leo. That soul-crushing feeling of helplessness came crashing back, the exact same despair he felt in the final battle of his past life. Long-range magic was completely useless against the evil god Vidrak, and it was painfully clear Leo had been blessed with Vidrak's power, which meant long-range magic wouldn't work on him either. Setsuna formed the dagger again, but the instant it grazed, the energy radiating from Leo's palm, it fizzled out of existence. Knowing that was a dead end, Setsuna vanished in a blink, reappearing directly in Leo's blind spot for a surprise attack. This was his only shot. But before the blade could even nick Leo's skin, it dissolved into nothing all over again. Leo turned around slowly, completely unfazed. "It's pointless. My ability to sense mana is on a whole different level than yours." The words barely left his lips before he unleashed a fireball that sent Setsuna rocketing backward, skidding dozens of feet across the pavement before grinding to a stop. Leo's voice dripped with pure arrogance. "My long-range magic isn't something that trash from your department could ever hope to touch." I was actually planning to go all out against you, give you a real fight, but I don't really have time to play around anymore. So today, this is where it ends for you. With a casual flick of his hand, a stray arc of magic shot out and punched clean through Setsuna's right leg. Setsuna's leg buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. The situation had just gone from bad to catastrophic. But even then he refused to break. A wrecked leg meant nothing. He still had his ace in the hole, his ultimate move, charge shot. He still had to ask, his voice raw. "Leo, why are you doing this?" A malicious glint lit up in Leo's eyes. He let out a twisted cackle and said, "I got sick of this boring world a long time ago. You know, when you see a kid's sandcastle, don't you just get the urge to kick it over?" As he spoke, power began to swirl in his palm again, preparing the spell that would snuff out Setsuna's life. In that instant, Setsuna forced himself back onto his feet. He was out of options. He had to pour everything into this one final charge shot. He only had enough mana left in the tank for a single attempt. He had to remember that feeling, that sensation from his past life when he actually managed to wound Vidrak himself. But Leo's casting speed was terrifyingly fast. Before Setsuna could even finish powering up his shot, Leo's spell was already screaming towards him. In that final, critical moment, a storm of brilliant white flames suddenly flooded Setsuna's vision, their target aimed directly at Leo, who was still in the middle of casting his own spell. Leo simply raised a hand, and the roaring white flames disintegrated inch by agonizing inch. It was clear the attack had come from the dragon-like creature perched on the roof above them, and looking closer, Setsuna realized it was the headmaster. And the attacker was none other than his own summoned dragon, commanded by the headmaster, who had traced the wild mana spikes all the way to this spot. His face was a mask of regret as he looked at Setsuna, saying, "My deepest apologies. If I'd been a second slower, you would have been annihilated." As he spoke, the headmaster's eyes turned to ice, locking onto Leo. This was the true puppet master behind the whole tournament disaster. And the moment he confirmed it was Leo, a heavy weight settled on the headmaster. The last thing he ever wanted was to fight one of his own students. But to protect the academy, some battles have to be fought no matter how much you hate it. A colossal, crushing wave of mana exploded outwards, so intense it almost slammed Setsuna's eyes shut. The headmaster raised his right hand, his voice weaving a complex incantation. With a sharp thrust forward, the white dragon's jaws gaped open, unleashing a roaring inferno of dragon breath. An apocalyptic pressure wave blasted out, making the very fabric of space shudder. But what happened next left Setsuna absolutely paralyzed. Leo just casually flicked his wrist, throwing up a protective field. The ridiculously powerful white flames just vanished, wiped from existence. This was the power, the evil god. Vidra had gifted him mana disintegration. The headmaster's entire demeanor shifted. He never thought a power like that could actually be real. It was a dark prophecy buried deep in the Academy archives. When an unknown darkness awakens, the world will drown in catastrophe. And mana disintegration was one of the forbidden abilities heralding that darkness. As this grim power surged, Leo's ego swelled to monstrous proportions. He lifted his hand, mana churning violently in his palm, as he chanted, weaving together 3 different elemental powers, all at once. What was even more insane was that he was fusing them in almost perfect harmony. Setsuna could only stare, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe Leo could pull off the legendary triple-element fusion magic. Across from them, the headmaster slowly shut his eyes, drawing his own power inward. The instant they snapped back open, his vision was razor-sharp. Dynamic vision activated. At that exact moment, Leo's spell climaxed. With a sickening thud, the magic detonated, exploding into a storm of absolute indiscriminate destruction. The headmaster's voice cut through the chaos, telling Setsuna to take 2 steps to his right. Facing a tidal wave of deadly spells, Setsuna moved on pure instinct, sidestepping the barrage and escaping by a hair's breadth. The headmaster, meanwhile, just strolled through the magical downpour like it was a walk in the park. Seeing his ultimate attack amount to nothing, Leo started to panic, cursing himself for not going for a one-shot kill from the start. But dynamic vision was just the warm-up act for the headmaster's real power. Realizing this, Leo finally dropped all pretenses. With a blood-curdling roar, a world-breaking amount of mana flooded the battlefield, making space itself warp and tremble. That aura was unmistakable, the power of the evil god Vidra. After his transformation was complete, Leo simply opened his hand. But in that one gesture, the headmaster felt a primordial sense of doom. If that attack hit the ground, the entire academy would be vaporized. In that split second of realization, the headmaster immediately started chanting a flight spell. Fueled by the magic, he rocketed into the sky with his white dragon. The only way to save the school was to take the fight airborne and minimize the collateral damage. Leo couldn't care less. To him, where they fought didn't matter. If anything, being in the air just made it harder for his opponent to dodge his long-range attacks. The white dragon bellowed, blasting a torrent of flame straight at him, but at the exact moment the 2 attacks were about to clash, Leo's magical projectile ripped clean through the dragon's fire like it was tissue paper. With no time to evade, the white dragon took the full force of the blast. Its body completely disintegrated before it was violently yanked back into the summoning dimension. Leo smirked, satisfied. This round was his win, no question. Even the headmaster had to admit it, he was getting old. This new era belonged to the young guns. Then, as the smoke began to clear, a figure shot out from the haze. Only then did Leo understand. The White Dragon's sacrifice wasn't a failure, it was a diversion for Setsuna's ambush. His face hardened as he threw up both hands, instantly materializing a barrier. Too bad for him, Setsuna's charge shot was already fully powered up. This attack was about to demonstrate the raw, devastating power of close combat magic. Leo just chuckled, no spell can break this barrier. That smug smile lasted for exactly 2.5 seconds. In the very next instant, the barrier exploded into a million pieces. The smirk on Leo's face froze solid. This was Setsuna's ultimate ace in the hole, the charged shot. As long as the attack hit fast enough, it could shatter the shield before the mana disintegration effect could even activate. When the dust finally settled, Leo was just a lifeless heap on the ground. Turns out getting up close and personal still works. It could literally bypass the decomposition of mana. In that split second, Setsuna was damn glad he'd specced into close quarters magic, this time around. Just as Setsuna starts hashing out Leo's fate with the headmaster, a voice cuts through the tension from behind them. Leo somehow staggers back to his feet, his voice a raw whisper. That one actually hurt. You always got a surprise up your sleeve, don't you? Setsuna was floored. He never thought Leo could get up after eating a fully charged shot like that. But there he was, slowly wiping a trickle of blood from his lips. Then with a savage roar, Leo materializes a magic missile right at his chest and it blasts towards Setsuna at an insane speed. Without even blinking, Setsuna summons a mana dagger to his hand and lunges to meet the attack head-on. But the second their powers clash, the dagger just disintegrates. Setsuna takes the full force of the blast, getting absolutely launched through the air and slammed into the wall behind him. The impact is so brutal it shatters the stone itself. Setsuna just crumples to the floor, completely powerless. That projectile wasn't normal. It was laced with mana decomposition. Pure agony rips through his entire body, and his vision starts to tunnel. And in that fading consciousness, memories flash before his eyes. Of him and Leo training side by side back in the day. He remembers Leo nailing a bullseye from way out, bragging that a shot like that was as easy as drinking water. See, back then, Setsuna was the star prodigy of the long-range magic division, and Leo was his partner, his ride or die. And now that same dude is standing over him ready to vaporize his head with one shot. Suddenly, Setsuna's eyes fly open. He's staring up at the familiar sterile white ceiling of the school infirmary. Layla's standing right by his bed and she tells him he's been out cold for 3 entire days. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hole in his chest. He'd been beaten. Again. Wrecked by the power of a demon god. First, Vidraka took him out in his past life. Now he gets bodied by Leo's twisted, corrupted power. Sensing his despair after a loss that heavy, Layla tries to comfort him. But Setsuna bolts upright in bed. The headmaster, what happened to him? The urgency in his voice is undeniable. When he hears the headmaster is safe and sound in his office, Setsuna immediately swings his legs over the side of the bed. Layla rushes to stop him, her face etched with worry. Don't move, you're not even close to being healed. You'll just tear your wounds open, but Setsuna just holds up a hand, trying to reassure her. He tells her there's something he absolutely has to discuss with the headmaster, promising he'll be careful not to push himself too hard. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, a serious meeting is already underway. He's already briefed the heads of all 8 departments on the Leo situation. Just as they wrap up, ready to move out, the door bursts open, and it's Setsuna, who nearly runs right into them. The headmaster's face floods with visible relief at the sight of him. But Professor Sayers, the head of long-range magic, gives Setsuna this weird, hard-to-read look. Leonio claps a hand on Setsuna's shoulder, his voice gentle. Hang in there. Looks like you got completely wrecked this time. Everyone's been on edge about you. With that, he gives a small wave, a signal that they'll catch up for real later. And then he's gone. Wasting no time, Setsuna marches right up to the headmaster. His voice is tight with urgency. What the hell happened after I passed out? But as his emotions flare, a sharp pain lances through his injuries and he staggers, almost losing his footing. It turns out, after Setsuna went down, Leo had burned through a massive amount of his own mana in that final explosive attack. Knowing he was running on empty, Leo ripped open a spatial rift, and inside it, a single crimson eye glowed with this terrifying, overpowering aura. Leo was using the rift to bail. The headmaster was about to step in and stop him by force. But that eye, that thing staring back from the other side, sent a primal fear down his spine, and he knew he had no choice but to let Leo escape. The second Setsuna hears this, it clicks. That eye in the rift, it had to be the power of a demon god. The headmaster seems to catch on that Setsuna knows way more than he should, and his face instantly hardens. He needs Setsuna to spill everything he knows right now, no holding back. It was crystal clear the headmaster suspected Setsuna understood the real story behind this whole mess. Just as Setsuna is scrambling for an answer, the headmaster suddenly rips the white glove off his left hand. His suspicion was rooted in the secret magic sealed in that very hand. A secret that besides the headmaster himself, only Setsuna knew about. Locking Setsuna in a heavy gaze, the headmaster asks, "So, can you finally tell me the truth?" A cold sweat instantly breaks out on Setsuna's back. It's not that he doesn't want to tell him. It's that he can't just come out and say, "Yo, I'm from 10 years in the future." While Setsuna is desperately trying to figure out how to even begin to explain, the headmaster senses his turmoil and asks quietly, "Is there some reason you can't speak about it?" Setsuna genuinely has no idea how to drop the time travel bomb. And then out of nowhere, a horrifying possibility slammed into him. He frantically motioned for the headmaster to look at the temporal necklace he wore. Just as he feared, the headmaster's jaw dropped. The temporal necklace was completely dead, its light extinguished. Its blessing was gone, which could only mean one thing: it had been cashed in on a different timeline. And the person who burned through that one-time use power was Setsuna himself, from 10 years in the future. As Setsuna unloaded the grim truth of that future, the headmaster learned of his own coming assassination, and the apocalypse the demon god Vidrak would unleash upon the world. But in that moment he understood something far deeper. For the necklace to activate, Setsuna must have been crushed by a regret so monumental, so soul-shattering it bent time itself. And even after being reborn, Setsuna was still shackled to that same cruel destiny. In that instant, the headmaster made a vow. From this day forward, he would be the pillar that supported Setsuna. This meant unlocking the forbidden arts for him, allowing Setsuna to master the cryptic magic of the left hand to stop Vidrak's world-ending rampage. The headmaster's voice was heavy with purpose. The magic of the left hand. It doesn't belong to any known system. It is a power that transcends all other magic. Its name is spirit magic. He then beckoned Setsuna to follow him to a more private location for the full rundown. That place was the ancient sacred tree, the very spot where Setsuna pushed his limits every single day. Spirit magic, as you might guess, uses magic to channel and fuse the user's soul with actual spirits, letting them tap into an insane amount of raw power. What makes it a total game changer, unlike any other magic out there, is the sheer mind-boggling variety of combos you can pull off. With that said, the headmaster decided a live demonstration was in order. His eyes sharpened, his vision kicking into overdrive. It was the exact same pressure, the same feeling Setsuna got when he threw down with Leo. The headmaster then flashed a peace sign at Setsuna, announcing he'd show him by using scissors next. But in the first round, Setsuna's rock was completely swallowed by the headmaster's paper. The headmaster held up a single finger as if to say, "Don't sweat it, we're just getting started." In the second round, Setsuna's paper got absolutely wrecked. The third round was just as brutal. No suspense, just another crushing defeat. Staring at his own trembling hand, Setsuna started having a full-blown existential crisis. The headmaster then explained, "That is the power of the time spirit. It allows you to see a few seconds into the future. But this world has way more spirits. Make a pact with a wind spirit, and you can literally fly. A water spirit lets you phase through physical attacks, and basically become a walking fire department. Best of all, spirit magic has insane synergy with close-quarters combat." But the headmaster warned there was a catch. Before you can even think about making a contract with a spirit, you have to master the first, most crucial step. As he spoke, the headmaster closed his eyes, showing him how it was done. A soft, serene light began to radiate from his entire body. Spirits are literally everywhere. The only way to connect with them is to completely clear your mind and become one with nature. Following his lead, Setsuna shut his eyes and tried to vibe with it. He prayed silently, "Spirits, lend me your power so I can face down the demon god Vidrak." Just then, a single leaf drifted down through the quiet air. The headmaster stared at Setsuna, his expression pure disbelief. Unbelievably, Setsuna hadn't even cleared the tutorial stage. If he was stuck on level 1, how in the world was he supposed to beat the final boss in 10 years and save everyone? The headmaster had a theory. The problem was Setsuna's rage. To truly sync with nature, you had to find a state of absolute inner peace. That means dropping all conscious thought, letting go, and just feeling the world around you. The headmaster gave Setsuna's shoulder a reassuring pat. "Don't rush it," he said, guessing it might take Setsuna 5 years to get the hang of spirit magic. After all, it had taken the headmaster himself 3 years. But Setsuna didn't have the luxury of waiting 5 years. The demon god's apostles could strike, at any time without warning. These apostles, just like Vidrak, were beings from another world, each one packing a power that existed, completely outside the rules of normal magic. Leo's decay ability was a perfect example, a power that just straight up negated magic. 10 years into the future, Setsuna had clashed with one of these apostles. He only managed to fight to a draw by abusing the range of his long-distance spells, and even that was a close call. There was no doubt that more of these monsters were already hiding in plain sight. The headmaster heard his concerns, but gave him a stern warning: "You cannot force spirit magic. Letting your emotions run wild will only end in catastrophe." With that, he gave Setsuna his next mission: participate in the upcoming joint dungeon training, to forge himself in the fires of battle. He told him Leoniel would fill him in on the details. The headmaster was betting that Setsuna would find a breakthrough during the training. His final piece of advice: focus on recovery for now. This place was a whole new level of dangerous, a trial unlike anything he'd ever endured. Once the formalities were done, the headmaster hit Setsuna with a strict gag order concerning Vidraka and the Dark Apostles until the mission was over. Spirit magic classes were officially on hold. Setsuna took the news in stride. He needed to be at 100% to survive what was coming. In that instant, Leoniel's imposing frame filled the entire stage, commanding the room. He silenced the murmuring crowd, ready to drop the bombshell announcement about the joint dungeon training. A shockwave of confusion rippled through the student body. This was a curriculum they had never even heard of. Leoniel broke it down for them. If the exchange tournament is a showcase for your departments, this joint training is designed to shatter your limits. More importantly, he added, it's about forging real teamwork. Your proving ground will be a one-star dungeon. Given the extreme risks, this is completely voluntary. But make no mistake, you have to qualify to even be considered. The selection trials kick off in 2 weeks. Until then, you better grind. Let's see who's truly built different. A fire lit in Setsuna's eyes. He had to secure a spot. It was his only path back to learning spirit magic from the headmaster. Soon after, Setsuna linked up with Lyra to grab some food and recharge his batteries. But instead of a quiet meal, they were met with a storm of whispers. News of his tournament victory had already gone viral across campus. A small crowd of starstruck fans had already formed, gawking at Setsuna like he was a prince straight out of a webtoon. Lyra scoffed at the ridiculous scene. Just a few days ago, they were all trashing you. Look at them now. Just then, a total stranger stepped into Setsuna's personal space. The man was Carl, a rep from the Noble Association, and he was there specifically for the tournament's new champion. Carl slid in with an invitation, offering Setsuna a place in their exclusive club. He bragged that only mages from the most elite bloodlines ever get in, but he was making a special exception for a melee fighter. In reality, only Carl knew the real score. This so-called exception was just a power play to boost his association's clout. The fangirls absolutely erupted, which just went to show how much of a big deal Carl was around the academy. Carl gave a smug gesture, telling Setsuna he should really marinate on the offer. After all, he gloated elite groups don't just hand out invitations like candy, not even to a tournament winner. He then shot a dismissive look at Lyra, implying that wasting time on women was beneath a true champion. Setsuna didn't even hesitate. He shot down Carl's invitation flat. In the magic world, he couldn't care less about bloodlines. He clapped back that if anything, joining their pretentious little club would be the real waste of his time. Carl was absolutely stunned. It was the first time in his life anyone had ever straight up rejected him. Rage flashing in his eyes, he summoned his weapon, dead set on defending the so-called honor of his association. Clutching his monoblade, Carl blitzed straight for Setsuna. In a blink, he was already at his back, sending the nearby fans into a full-blown panic. At the last possible second, a slender but insanely strong hand stopped his attack cold. It was Lyra, her red hair blazing as she tore into him. Are you clueless that personal duels are banned on campus? Or do you just think the rules don't apply to you? Carl struggled against her grip, only to realize with a shock that Lyra's power was on a whole other level. He had to pour every ounce of his strength into breaking free. Totally humiliated, he had no choice but to retreat with his tail between his legs, propped up by his lackeys. It was only then that Setsuna fully grasped how much stronger Lyra had gotten. Their conversation was cut short by a sharp voice from behind. It was Carol from the summoning department. To thank Setsuna for saving her from Leo, Carol invited him to her room for a private conversation. Lyra froze, completely shook. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Right until Carol pulled out a brand new frilly apron. That's when Lyra got it. It was just an invitation to cook. Carol was genuinely trying to repay Setsuna for saving her life. She was determined to cook him a proper meal herself. Drago got an invite too. After all, the more the merrier. Besides, the menu for the day was medicinal food packed with healing properties. The perfect power-up for melee fighters. As this was all happening, Setsuna was just staring into the kitchen, lost in his own world. Earlier, the headmaster had dropped a bombshell. Carol had completely forgotten her close friend Leo even existed. That reveal had Setsuna convinced that someone had tampered with her memories. Drago noticed his friend's dark expression and nodded for him to spill what was on his mind. But just as Setsuna was about to speak, a piercing scream erupted from the kitchen. Carol had hit a culinary disaster she couldn't handle solo. Left with no choice, Drago was roped in to help, though seeing the maid apron on his hulking frame was comedy gold. As for Setsuna, the supposed guest of honor, his only mission at the moment was to kick back and wait for the food to drop. In no time, a table overflowing with a gourmet feast materialized before him. Not about to let all that good food go to waste, Setsuna supercharged his stomach with mana to crank his digestion and absorption into overdrive. Then he started inhaling food at a terrifying speed. Lyra could only stare, her jaw practically on the floor at the sheer velocity of his eating. That's when a bowl of shimmering crystal-clear egg soup snagged Setsuna's gaze. And for the plot twist, Drago himself had cooked it. But the scent wafting from the soup made Carol freeze in her tracks. Setsuna, however, threw back Drago's soup without a second thought, accepting the gesture, no questions asked. Meanwhile, Drago took one sip of his own creation and immediately flushed bright red with secondhand embarrassment. The unexpectedly wholesome scene zapped Setsuna with a memory from his past life, a flashback to when his own world was peaceful and normal. Fast forward 2 weeks and the day for the joint dungeon training has finally arrived right on schedule. By the time they got there, all the students on the roster had already congregated at the rally point, waiting in a tense silence. Drago could tell instantly that Setsuna's entire vibe had leveled up big time since they last saw each other. Setsuna confirmed it, explaining that it was all thanks to some medicinal meals packed with healing magic. Drago shot back that he'd better keep it up, warning him that the power-up would just fizzle out if he stopped. Hearing that for the first time, Setsuna felt a genuine sense of relief. He knew he could trust Drago to have his back for real. Right then, an unfamiliar voice from behind them completely shattered the moment. The guy introduces himself as Yujo, a third-year student from the formation department. A beat later, his partner pulls down her hood, revealing an absolute stunner named Yui. The second Yujo recognized Setsuna as the exchange tournament champ, he darted over with a way too friendly grin, practically radiating forced goodwill. Just as Drago was starting to think Yujo might actually be a decent dude, Yui shot Yujo a subtle, almost invisible smirk. In that single instant, Yujo's entire demeanor flipped. That super friendly personality he had on display just seconds before, yeah, it was all just a carefully crafted performance. Once every student slated for the joint training had shown up, Giovanni, the instructor running the show, stepped forward to lay down the rules. This joint training is all about synergy between the formation department and the melee department. The instructor motioned to the gaping dungeon entrance behind him, his tone dead serious. The hellscape they were about to walk into was the sealed Demon Ruins, a dungeon that serves as a prison for seriously powerful demons, and even some unknown undead nightmares. Because of that, the primary goal of this whole exercise was brutally simple. Wreck any monster you see. Every creature you drop gets sealed into your memory bracelet, and your final score will be calculated based on the total number of seals you rack up on that thing. Every monster you take down is worth 5 points, and any loot they drop can be traded in for bonus points. Any student who blasts past 100 points will officially qualify for a visit to the Magic Kingdom. Hearing that, Setsuna's resolve solidified into steel. There was no way he could afford to lose this. In his past life, the Magic Kingdom was where he'd first met a ton of legendary mages. If he could earn his way back in, he might just be able to find them again. The instructor then delivered a final stone-cold warning. No matter what happens, students were forbidden from venturing too deep into the dungeon. The monsters lurking down there would require a fully coordinated squad just to survive. If they hit a real emergency, all they had to do was flood their bracelet with mana to trigger an emergency teleport to safety. Setsuna glanced down at the bracelet, locked onto his wrist, his target already locked in. This time he was hitting a perfect 100 points, and it turned out Drago had the exact same idea. Drago made a pact with him right there. They'd meet up again in the Magic Kingdom once they crushed this thing. Setsuna agreed instantly. At the bare minimum, the melee department was about to secure 2 of those visitation passes. As the instructor gave the official command to start, Setsuna and Drago unleashed the tiniest fraction of their aura. Even so, the sheer pressure that rolled off them was so intense that the students closest to them found it hard to even keep their eyes open. Standing off to the side, Yui looked genuinely terrified by the insane power Setsuna was radiating. The joint training was on, and the students surged into the dungeon like a tidal wave. The second they crossed the threshold, nobody could believe their eyes. A colossal, sprawling chamber existed deep under the ground. Setsuna reached out, his fingers brushing against the ancient flora, plastered to the walls, quietly suspecting that an entire lost civilization might have once called this place home. He remembered what the headmaster had told him, that this training exercise would be absolutely critical for the missions that were coming. His purpose was razor sharp: use this place to power up his mana, because it was the only shot he had at ever defeating the evil god Vidra. Before he could get lost in thought, the other students began to file in. The path ahead fractured into 2 distinct routes, paralyzing the group with uncertainty. Without a second thought, the majority bolted down the right-hand corridor. But Yujo, he wasn't buying it. Drago was convinced the only way forward was through the deepest, most treacherous route. He motioned for Setsuna, pointing him toward the gloomiest passage on their left. But Setsuna completely ignored him. Instead, he strode directly to a wall overgrown with moss, pressed his palm against the stone, and felt a faint, hollow echo from within. That was it. He was positive it was a fake wall. Drago just stood there, completely floored. He never would have guessed Setsuna had that kind of insight. Setsuna just nodded, explaining that the ridiculously thick moss was a dead giveaway, that a huge empty space was concealed right behind it. Yujo wasn't buying it for a second, arguing. The moss was just a random fluke. Setsuna was about to bring up the subtle airflow he'd felt, but Drago was already winding up a punch. The wall imploded with a thunderous boom, revealing a massive dark opening. Glancing back at the crew, Setsuna asked coolly, "So you believe me now, this is the way?" With Setsuna and Drago in the lead, they plunged in, racing to rack up points. Yujiro and the girl followed, whispering excitedly about how they were about to score big. But as they descended, a winding staircase, a giant boulder crashed down, sealing the path. "Stand back, I got this," Drago yelled, instantly summoning a mana blade in each hand. With one flawless strike, he sliced the boulder clean in two. Confidence just radiated from the guy. This was his chance to show them the overwhelming power of a close combat mage. More than that, he refused to be outdone by Setsuna. Setsuna was just about to give him props when a terrifying wave of killing intent surged from the shadows. He twisted away, an arrow screaming past where his head had just been. In that same instant, Setsuna exploded into action, his own mana blade igniting. A single, sweeping slash disintegrated every arrow in the volley. Drago could only gawk, realizing Setsuna's perception and reflexes were on a whole other level, totally monstrous. A second later, Drago's eyes locked on a treasure chest up ahead. He lunged for it. But just as his fingers brushed the lid, a strange magical sigil flared to life, enveloping the chest. In a flash, it vanished and reappeared in Yujo's hands. That sigil was Yujo's signature ability, and it just snagged him a cool 15 points. Seeing that Drago was absolutely seeing red, another prize snatched right from under his nose. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to cool off. After all, it was a scummy move, but technically within the rules of the joint training. They pushed forward. As Setsuna and Drago forged deeper, a huge stone slab came crashing down from the ceiling without any warning. Drago reacted instantly, shattering it with one punch. And what do you know? Another treasure chest was hidden in the rubble. But as Drago reached for his prize, Yujo's teleporting sigil appeared on the chest yet again. In the next moment, the chest was yoinked directly into Yujo's possession. His score instantly doubled to 30 points. Drago could only watch fuming as his reward was stolen right in front of his face. A few moments later, Drago unleashed his frustration on a dungeon monster, but just as he was about to land the final blow, Yujo's sigil appeared again, hijacking the kill that rightfully belonged to Drago. At that moment, it all clicked for Setsuna. He finally understood Yujo's entire gimmick. Wherever that sigil appeared, a magic circle formed, basically letting Yujo teleport whatever he wanted. The monster collapsed lifeless, and Yujiro's score rocketed to 40 points, while Drago was still stuck at 0. Taking advantage of the drama, Yuzoha quietly dispatched 3 monsters of her own. Yujiro even had the nerve to taunt Drago, saying that while his power was impressive, his speed was a total joke. Drago gritted his teeth, his knuckles white with rage. He was about to snap, but Setsuna stepped in front of him, holding him back. Setsuna called him out directly, stating that Yujo's tactics were just pathetic. There was no other way to spin it. He was straight up stealing the results of Drago's hard work. Yujo just gave a lazy shrug. "This world belongs to the strong. If you can do what I do," he taunted, "you're welcome to try and take my points." Setsuna didn't even reply. His gaze had shifted to Yuzoha, who was standing off to the side. Unlike everyone else, she seemed completely unbothered by the scores. They moved on. The group ventured deeper into the dungeon. For a while, neither Setsuna nor Drago managed to score anything. Suddenly, a cold feeling washed over Setsuna. Something was seriously wrong with this room. By then, Yujo had already slapped his sigil onto another treasure chest, totally oblivious to the dark, menacing aura practically leaking out of it. Just as he reached to open it, Setsuna screamed, "Wait, stop," but he was too late. A terrifying blast of demonic energy erupted from the chest, and the entire chamber began to violently shake. Setsuna never imagined it would get this bad. In the next instant, a massive jet black claw burst straight through the chest's lid. This was a creature from another dimension entirely,